I mocked him for being short until he got fed up, stood on his chair, and did this. Hello, Reddit. My name is Kitty, and I'm a 25-year-old successful realtor. I own my own house, too. It was given to me as a gift from one of my clients who apparently had too many. The client actually bought houses and resold them for higher prices. I own a dog, Reg, and my favorite quote in life by Les Brown is, "Don't let anyone's opinion become your reality." The point of all this introduction is to tell you guys how much of my own person I am. I am strongly independent, and I hate to let anyone think they have the upper hand. I barely have friends because they think I'm too proud or too full of myself. Some even think that I have no space for friendship or relationships because of how much space my ego occupies. I never minded them, not before. I felt it was only pure jealousy because somehow, most times, I usually would find myself among small-minded people, and when I let out my opinion, they flip. I am a realtor, for Pete's sake. I move with the high circles. I get invited to parties that even celebrities usually beg for invitations. Only the rich and influential get my business cards because of how highly pricey I am. I have never doubted my words or actions. Well, until now. I think I might be losing a very important person to me, someone I didn't even know was important until a few weeks ago. It's actually my boyfriend, Ryan. We've been together for 5 years now, and we would have probably been married, but I kept pushing it off because I was always too busy with my career. Now Ryan isn't picking my calls or replying to my texts, and I have no means of reaching out to him. Well, the thing is, I've always mocked him for being shorter than I am, but I never knew that Ryan actually hated it when I did that because whenever he did complain and we argued about it, he always ended up apologizing, so I felt I was doing the right thing. But I guess that day he had had enough. I had mocked him until he got fed up and did this. He told me while standing on the chair, which had gotten everyone's attention, "Well, this short man has got an announcement to make, and that is, I'm leaving your tall ass. Go frolic around with one of your married clients as you've been doing, but I'm not waiting around to be insulted daily. Goodbye." After he made that shocking speech, he left the party, and then there were murmurs everywhere. They were probably wondering which of my rich married clients I was sleeping with. It really isn't my fault. I've never felt the need to explain myself to people. But for once in my life, I feel like I have to explain this whole thing from the beginning so you guys can understand and not judge me, as you're probably already doing. I was raised in a family of 5 boys plus my parents. I am the only girl and the last child. You can imagine how dreadful it is to grow up with one brother, but this time 5 of them, and they are all much older than me. My immediate brother was older than me by a whopping 8 years, so yes, I wasn't planned for. I was an accident, but a beautiful mistake, as my mother would say. My family was like every other family, perhaps not all, because you might not have as many kids in the house as we did. We were noisy and loud, always got in trouble, and still stood our ground. Being amongst 5 big brothers growing up did a lot for my self-confidence. They never were as protective as you'd have thought them to be. In fact, our parents raised us to be very independent, so my brothers left me to fight my battles. I struggled with self-confidence for a while, especially because my brothers were almost perfect. They had some very high standards, and it was difficult for me to reach them. They were the best academically and even in sports. They all had scholarships right from high school to study any course of their choice, and naturally I was expected to follow their path. I had difficulty with that because of how much I had had to struggle with my studies. I was not as brilliant as my brothers, and I had to work 3 times as hard as they did just to get an average. My parents and brothers never said anything about me being less or disappointing the family, but I just felt like a big disappointment to them. After I struggled to finish high school, I told my parents I wasn't going to college. They first argued about it with me and even involved my brothers, but I adamantly stuck with my decision. I felt I wasn't smart enough, and I decided I didn't want to struggle through college. Besides, I had nothing I wanted to work hard for in college. Eventually, my parents gave in and allowed me to do whatever I wanted. Because I decided not to go to college, people looked at me strangely, especially when my high school mates started leaving for college or whenever they came home for the holidays. I didn't mind, though. In fact, I never spoke to them so they wouldn't get to brag about college to me. I loved being at home and not having to study or stress my brain out. I loved my part-time job because the owner trusted me with everything, and I always got to organize everything for him because he was always too busy to do so. The day I decided to become a realtor was the day one of my brothers brought home his fiancée. They were getting married and decided to settle in the same town as our parents. So they wanted to get a house and asked for my help in searching for one. I was so excited that I went from one house to another, looking through them until I found one I was satisfied with. When my brother and his fiancée came to check out the house I had picked for them, they were so proud of my choice that my brother gave me tips, which pleased me so much. My brother's fiancée advised me to get licensed to become a realtor, and I got interested in that. I started doing my research on how to become a realtor. I told my parents about my decision, and they were so happy I finally wanted to do something instead of doing part-time jobs, and they paid for my online classes. I still worked my shifts and did my online classes. I wanted to save up to move out of the town my parents lived in. I wanted to get my own place and be independent. I did do all that, and I became a certified and licensed realtor within 2 years, and also moved out of my parents' house to live in a different town and in a small apartment I got for myself. The first 3 years as a realtor were really hard. I couldn't seem to get any real job. I was new in town and first had to explore the whole town and see things for myself, and then I had to get an office space where people could come seeking my services. It took a full 2 years before I was able to get an important client, and that client had come because he had been interested in the girl, not in buying a property or house. It had been frustrating having to suffer his lustful gaze while he pretended to go over the documents and pictures. He would pester me to go with him for lunch or dinner with the excuse that he wanted to be able to discuss business in an informal environment. I would go just because I wanted to get him as a client, because I knew how rich and influential he was. If he did get a property from me and referred me, I would actually get the boost I had been hoping for. So I suffered his suggestive glances and occasional touches that I would stylishly remove myself from without stopping to smile. And eventually he came out with what he wanted exactly. He knew how desperate I was for him to get a property from me, so he requested sex in return. At first I refused blatantly, but then I became desperate. My parents still kept sending me money and my brothers because they knew that my business wasn't doing so well, and it was killing me. I hated it so much that I stopped calling them and even picking their calls because of how low they made me feel, but they still never stopped sending money to me. The money helped a great lot because without it, I would have probably been homeless and without the small office space I rented, but I still wanted to strongly be the one paying for all that out of my own pocket, and it killed my pride not being able to do so. So I accepted his offer and I slept with him. He had been the first man I slept with in my life, and he had been so pleased that I was a virgin that he bought the property and gave me twice the money required for my own services. I was really happy, and I hadn't even cared that he was married with kids. I finally got the big spotlight I needed for my business. He referred me to his friends, and they also started to get properties from me. That was how I became a very successful realtor. Although I slept with some of my clients to get them to buy from me, not all. It was one of the married clients of mine that I was sleeping with who bought the house I own now. He bought the property in my name and gave it to me as a gift on my 25th birthday. I had been so happy. I got a bigger and better office space, and I employed people to work with me. It had also been another one of my clients who paid for the office space. I was finally living my dream. It required a little booty call, but at that point it didn't matter to me anymore because all I got from it felt like it was worth it. I was 26 when I met Ryan. Ryan came to my office to get a property. He had moved into town recently, and he wanted to get settled in as fast as possible. Ryan was and still is really handsome. I thought that the very moment I met him. He had those eyes that felt like they could stare into your soul, and you could get lost in them forever. He was really, really handsome, and I remember I had even stuttered while talking to him. I, who never had. Even while I was still an amateur, I had been confident because I knew I had good business deals to offer. But in front of Ryan, I felt like I had been the one who was being interviewed for a job. Usually I'd ask a staff member of mine to go with him to see the properties, but I had personally decided to go because I somehow just wanted to stay with Ryan longer, and probably because I had never had younger clients before, especially one I felt attracted to at first sight. Mostly they were rich, way older than me, and mostly married. Ryan was very easy to talk to, and I loved hearing him talk about his job and why he wanted to move here. He picked the first property we checked, but I still insisted on showing him the others just to prolong our meeting. At the end of the day, I had expected him to collect my number after the whole thing, but I was disappointed that he didn't ask for it. He showed up the next day to pay for the property, and then he finally collected my personal number. Ryan and I started texting, and we talked randomly about everything and anything that came to mind. Sometimes we would go on for most of the night before one of us became sleepy. I loved talking to Ryan because he seemed to have an opinion on everything, and his opinions were always worth thinking about. He was not a realtor like I was, but he was a writer, an anonymous one, because he never used his real name for his books. He used his initials as his nickname. When he told me about his books and his initials, I remembered that he was a really popular anonymous writer, and because no one knew who he really was, it made his books all the more exciting to read. Because you'd feel like with this piece of writing you could guess what or who the writer was, but then another piece of his writing comes out, and you're imagining someone else. It confused and yet somehow excited people to read his books. But Ryan told me that he didn't want any spotlight and always preferred to stay hidden because he knew how fame could get into one's head. I agreed with him, but not totally, and we argued about it. Not angrily, though. Ryan and I were opposites, really. We had different views on different things, and we never really saw eye to eye on most matters. But instead of making us view our relationship as not working, we found it exhilarating, new, and different. He viewed things deeply with the insight of a writer, while I viewed things as I saw them, shallowly. I had never really seen the need to look beyond what I saw until I met Ryan. Ryan was really the perfect man. The only thing I had considered a problem was that Ryan was quite short. He was short. He was 5 feet 7 inches, but beside me, who was 6 feet, he was rather short. I've always loved fancy shoes, especially heels. I collected them like you'd collect artifacts. I loved how they made me taller than I usually am and how they made me tower above people. And it's easy to look down on people when you're quite tall. So heels were my babies, but I had to stop wearing them because I had been prepared to sacrifice those for Ryan because of how much I liked him. When Ryan finally asked me to be his girlfriend, I was over the moon. We started dating and it was blissful. I would stay mostly at his place and he sometimes came to mine, but he preferred me at his place rather than him at mine, and I never really wondered why. I thought of it as a male thing with ego and stuff, and I never took notice of it. Ryan was a really sweet boyfriend. He would call me at work to check if I had eaten lunch, and then he would pick me up from work when I was done. Although I did not have to go to work as regularly as I did or close as late as I did, I just enjoyed my work. Most times I just sat, relaxed, and breathed in happily. Not the fresh air you'd imagine I would, but I would breathe in because I had been able to achieve all this on my own. It made me giddy with excitement at how far I had grown in years, and made me really happy just staring at my achievements. Ryan most times would have to work on a new book, and when he did, he usually needed his space because of how focused he usually was. So going to work at those times was usually the option for me because I knew he could get lost in his writing for hours nonstop, and that would leave me looking for what to entertain myself with. Every month I got invited to different parties because of how popular I had become. Celebrities turned clients would invite me to parties, and sometimes I went, sometimes I did not, depending on my mood. Whenever I did not go, I'd send a gift card congratulating and expressing my deepest regrets for not showing up. When I did go, I'd take some presents depending on what party I got invited to. After falling in love with Ryan, I stopped having sex with the married clients of mine because of how much I loved him and wanted to prove to myself that I could get clients purely for business purposes. So when I got invited to parties, I'd look for ones with more potential clients that I'd go to, and that worked pretty well for 3 years. Until my business started to take a back seat. I wasn't getting clients as often as I usually had, and it frustrated me because it kind of put a stop to my usual shopping sprees and careless spending. I had to do something about it, but what it was I could do, I did not know. So this time, I got invited to another celebrity's party, and when I saw the list of other guests invited, I knew I had to be there. So I bought a new dress out of my already tight budget, and I took out one of my killer heels to match with it. I went to the party and it was extremely boring and not as much as I had expected it to be. The people I was trying to talk to were rich snobs who only came there to show off how wealthy they were. I eventually gave up and decided to go sit alone by the bar and ordered myself a cold martini while waiting for the party to end and for me to go back to my bed and nurse my wounded pride. I was sitting pretty, minding my business, while my mind wandered, thinking of the next course of action, when a man came to sit beside me. At first I had been startled, but then he ordered a drink, so I just kept quiet and stared at him, knowing he came purposely to talk to me. He grinned when he saw me watching and first took a big gulp of his drink before saying anything to me. That irritated me, and I wanted to leave, but he held my hand to stop me and introduced himself as Dan. I allowed him the benefit of the doubt, sat back down, and we started talking. We both had no interest in the party besides networking, and I somehow liked that we had the same goal. We talked for a while before I decided to leave, and he asked to take me out for drinks instead of going home directly. The offer was tempting, and I accepted not only because he was quite intriguing, but also because Ryan was on another one of his books, and it was a major one, so I couldn't distract him. So instead of going home and moping, I followed him to a restaurant where we ordered some chicken and drinks. Nay. We drank late into the evening, and by the end, we were both totally wasted, or I was totally wasted. I only know that I woke up in a different room entirely, not mine, and I had been stripped down to my underwear, and Dan was right beside me in a weird sleeping posture. Apparently, he had managed to stay awake enough to order a cab, and we were driven to the nearby hotel, where he booked a room as it was the only one available for the night. And apparently, I had gotten uncomfortable in the night and stripped myself of my dress. Dan and I laughed off the embarrassment, and we left the hotel after exchanging each other's contact information. Ryan called me early that morning after I had gotten home, taken a shower, and changed my clothes, to ask how the party had gone, and I told him bits and pieces, without mentioning anything about Dan. Honestly, why I did that, I would never know because I had just made a good friend. It wasn't like I had actually cheated or slept with Dan. But I just couldn't bring myself to tell Ryan about Dan for some reason. So I decided to take a week off work just to rest. It wasn't even like I had had any business for a while, and my workers were more than capable of handling everything. I stayed over at Ryan's place. When he was busy with his books, I watched a movie, read a book, or even slept. And when he wasn't, we had fun together, pun intended. I had expected a text from Dan since that day, but he never texted, and I always prided myself on the fact that I never texted first. I strongly believed that it was totally unladylike. Nah. So when he didn't text, I was sort of disappointed, but then waved it off. Nah. But I suddenly got a call from work that we had a major client coming for business, and he wanted to see me personally. I was excited and surprised at the same time. Finally, a big client after a while, but he was requesting to personally see me. It made me curious, and I quickly dressed up and left for work. Turned out that the big client had actually been Dan. I was so surprised when I saw him sitting there waiting to see me. He was not even dressed in a suit. He looked very casual, like the other night we had met and the morning we had parted. The only thing out of place was the way my assistant kept gushing about the handsome, young, rich married client on the phone, and I was really surprised because Dan had told me his business there was looking for clients too that night. When we were finally alone, Dan apologized for lying to me that night, but he was happy that I did not know who he was that night, and that he was able to breathe properly for once. Apparently, it had been his wife who hosted the party, and he hated being in the spotlight. He even told me how his marriage was arranged, how they had no kids because his wife refused to give him one, and that they did not love each other, and it was all for show. I was really surprised and did not know what to say to that. He promised to buy several properties from me and have me even help him resell to double his capital, but that was only if we continued our relationship as friends. I agreed almost immediately, of course. I was thinking about my financial gains in the situation, so I hadn't minded that he wanted to have a friend who treated him normally for once. But of course, being friends alone had not been what Dan apparently had in mind. We started first by seeing each other, but only in restaurants or hotel rooms or somewhere quite secluded, and I had thought it was probably because of his wife. But Dan apparently wanted us to be together because he tried to sleep with me one time. I had gone to his hotel room as he had requested, and I had gotten angry and left. I did not want to go back to my style of having to sleep with clients to get them on board. I loved Ryan, and although our relationship then was already at some point, Ryan and I kept having arguments, and it always ended up with him apologizing, though he felt like I was being too sassy and rude to people, and that I did not respect him. And I do not see what I do as disrespectful because we live in the 21st century, for Pete's sake. Why do I have to respect you as you say I should? Okay, there was a scenario where we had to go out together, and I had decided to wear my heels, but I knew we would look really stupid as a couple because of Ryan's short height, so I just told him that I wish my boyfriend was a bit taller. So yeah, I just teased him about his height. Was that really disrespectful? One time I had an office dinner with my staff, and I had invited him as my boyfriend. And while we were chatting, one of my staff had made a comment about how good we looked together, and I had laughed and jokingly said that we would have matched perfectly, except he wasn't as tall as I am. I accept that the dinner had turned awkward after my comment, but I did not even think anything of it until we got home. and Ryan started to get upset talking about it. I did not feel like I did anything wrong because I actually said what came to my mind at the time. And besides, it was the truth. He was my almost perfect match. Not perfect because of our height difference. There were other cases I cannot even recall what exactly had happened, but I remember Ryan making a big deal of it. I really felt there was nothing wrong with saying the obvious. He was tall, yes, but not as tall as I was. And making a comment about it does not have to be offensive, but Ryan believes it to be. So back to it. Even though Ryan and I were not doing too well, I still did not want to cheat on him again. But Dan kept calling and calling, telling me about how miserable his life was and that he needed a friend, and promised never to attempt what he tried the last time, and I agreed, only because I did not want to lose business. One time I had an argument with Ryan about the regular issues we usually had, and I had been really upset and called Dan to vent about my feelings because I really had no one else to do that with. I had no female friends because of how they viewed me. So I called him, and he offered for me to come over to his hotel room, and I agreed to. I went again to his hotel room. Now that I think about it, he stayed more in hotel rooms than in his house, and now I wonder why. We had some drinks, and he listened to me go on and on about Ryan and his insecurities about his height. Eventually, one thing led to another, and Dan and I ended up in his bed, and we had sex. I begged Dan the next morning that it could never happen again because I valued our friendship more, and he agreed. Well, these things don't exactly work the way you have them planned in your head, right? Because Dan and I continued sleeping together. We had sex over and over again at different times and different places. One time, Dan even came over to my place to sleep over after he complained about spending too much at hotels, and my place became our regular meeting spot. Dan would give me money to buy stuff for myself and also poured money into the properties, so I was really happy with our relationship. I kept seeing less and less of Ryan, and whenever he complained about it, I lied and gave excuses of being busy with work. I kept on seeing Dan even though we both knew that all we had was a mutual agreement to just have sex. Eventually, I got invited to the same party that Dan got invited to. We agreed to, of course, go with our different partners and pretend to just be business associates. I had asked Ryan to go with me, and he accepted after much persuasion. When we got to the party, I mingled with the people I knew, and eventually Dan and his wife showed up too, and I greeted him with the enthusiasm of a business partner, and not like I knew him personally. He introduced me to his wife, and she was a lovely person. She even invited us to join their table, and we did. She was not at all how Dan had always talked about her to me, but I did not mind. It was not my business, I had thought. So long as I had access to the money I did have access to because I was sleeping with him, I was fine with whatever way he portrayed his wife. So while at the table, his wife made a comment about how good Ryan and I looked together. And then again, I mockingly said how imperfect we were because of our height differences. Dan and his wife laughed awkwardly, and his wife made us all cheer with our drinks. I noticed how uncomfortable Ryan had been, but I ignored it, and we continued talking randomly about things. We talked again about relationships, and then again, I mentioned how perfect our relationship would have been if Ryan were taller. I think that must have pissed Ryan off, because he did the most shocking thing. He stood up abruptly and climbed up on his chair, gaining the attention of everyone, and told everyone right there how tired he was of me abusing his height, and that I could go frolic around with the rich married men as I was doing before. After saying his piece, he left, and even after I tried calling him back, he did not turn around or spare me a glance. To say I was embarrassed is an understatement of how I felt that evening. I left quietly. Well, not quietly because every eye was on me and they were murmuring, probably wondering who it was I was sleeping with. It's been a week now, and Ryan has refused to talk to me at all. I've gone to his place several times, but he has changed his password and refuses to open the door even though I know he's in. He has refused to take my calls or return them too. I really am confused. I really need your advice, guys. I love Ryan, and despite the embarrassment and all, I still want him back because I really do not think I can afford to lose him. So please, guys, what do I do? Update. Hello, Reddit. To say I'm sad is an understatement of how I feel right now. You guys cannot imagine how awful these past few weeks have been for me. It's been totally horrifying for me. You know how they say pride goes before a fall? Well, I did not even know I had pride until you guys literally made it your life mission to make me realize it. In these past few weeks, I have had more than enough time to self-reflect, and I realize just how stupid I've been. I ruined my life with my own hands. Now, even the business I built by sleeping around with rich clients is almost non-existent. Ever since that party, every client that had ever had anything to do with me withdrew. And funnily, even Dan withdrew too. He made excuses that he did not want his wife to suspect our affair. And I had been so mad about it that I used a burner phone to send a text message to his wife that he was actually cheating on her with a realtor. Last I heard, he's in the middle of a real messy divorce. But that still did not make me feel any better because my life now is meaningless. Ryan will have nothing to do with me. I have pleaded for a second chance to right my wrongs several times, but Ryan will not hear of it. I thought that being able to build things up and look down on people was actually an achievement, but I realize now without a doubt that it certainly isn't. Because I am being looked down upon now, and it certainly is not fun. I regarded myself as crazily independent, and yet I relied heavily on those men for their money, and I even slept my way to the top. Well, I certainly did not have to sleep my way to the bottom because that was very easy to get to. The most painful thing of it all is losing Ryan. Ryan had been the best partner, and yet I took advantage of his gentleness and would stupidly remind him every time about how successful I was. The success now is even a joke. I have nothing. I am nothing. I feel so empty and heartbroken. I wish I had not done all I did to hurt Ryan. I wish I could get a second chance to right my wrongs. I wish Ryan would forgive me. But I know it's probably not possible again. But I still just desperately wish he would. I lost Ryan. I lost him. Because I was selfish, proud, and a bimbo. I've never felt so alone in the past few weeks. My house feels so empty and cold and ridiculously big. The achievements I had always been happy about and thought others envied all crumbled, amounting to nothing. I know that right now, with the way I feel about losing Ryan, I probably would not give a damn if I had everything and couldn't get back Ryan. I wish I had never done or said the things I did to hurt Ryan. It feels awful, this feeling of mine. I hate being me right now. If there was a way to live outside my body and just exist without the memories of the awful things I did, I would have done it. My mind is a mess right now. I'm so messed up, I feel messed up. I never thought it possible to feel so many emotions, all of them not good, at once, and yet feel so empty and numb at the same time. It hurts so badly, it really, really hurts. Update. Hello, Reddit. This is regrettably my last post here. I know you're all happy you don't have to hear from me again because of how much hate you guys have for me, but I don't mind. Actually, I do. I do very much, but I mind more that Ryan hates me probably more than you guys do. And it's painful that his hate is valid, and I will probably live with this pain for my entire life because I caused it. Hope you guys learned a thing or two, though. Goodbye.